When we're seeing somebody who's overdosing, there's a few things that we're going to be looking for. A person's going to be unconscious. The breathing is going to be affected. So that might include really slow, shallow breathing, less than 1 every 5 seconds. It could be no breathing at all. It could be making gurgling or snoring type noises. But the way that opiates work is they do impact a person's ability to breathe. So what we want to do is ensure that, a person is actually non-responsive. They're experiencing an overdose. So we use an acronym that spells out S.A.V.E.M.E. The S stands for stimulate. So we want to try to get a response out of the person. We're always going to start verbally before we actually get up and into somebody's face. So we'll call their name. If we know their name, we can shout police, we can shout Narcan, whatever we need to shout at the person to try to get a response out of them. If they're not responding to the verbal cues, we're going to get a little bit more physical. Always start, once again, from a bit of a distance. And it's nice to be able to tell a person what you're going to do before you physically touch them. So I'm going to kick your foot with my foot, for instance. Kick at their foot, continue shouting at them. If they're not responding to the physical, like the kick of the foot, we're going to get a little heavier. So the knuckles along the sternum or just under the nose is quite an unpleasant sensation. And so if a person is not responding to that, we know that there is an emergency going on. Next up, we call 911. It is incredibly important to call 911 for every overdose that occurs. Overdoses can have a lot of other health complications associated. People can experience lung infections, people can experience brain damage, so it's really good to have paramedics on hand to be able to check them out in the case of the overdose, for sure. Also, we've been finding that in some cases the naloxone that's being provided in the kits isn't enough in the doses to be able to fully revive a person. And so it's good to have paramedics on the way in case there's not enough naloxone to actually bring somebody back from the overdose in that sense. They will have more on them there. So we've gone through stimulate, called 911. The next is the A in airway, or S.A.V.E.M.E, it's for airway. So making sure that there's nothing physically obstructing their airway. Get them on their back and tilt the chin up, forehead back. And you'll pinch the nose, otherwise your air is just going to come right back into your face. But you pinch the nose, and then the V is for ventilate. So we're going to provide a breath every 5 seconds. And this is the most important piece in responding to an overdose, is the breathing. People are dying, people are experiencing brain damage because they're not getting oxygen. If you don't have naloxone, you can still respond to an overdose. Giving them air is the most important piece. And in the kits that are being distributed, they do have air masks that come along with them. So you'll find it in a little pouch here. And how this works is that the plastic piece on it, and some do and some don't have plastic pieces, and some will have air masks that look different than this, but that would go into the mouth and you would provide the breathing while pinching the nose through the barrier. But 1 breath every 5 seconds, and if you can keep that going through the entire response process, that is going to spare a person from brain damage. There's no need to give chest compressions. If you're responding to an overdose, that's right, we're going to focus on the air. So it's different than a lot of the first aid training that other people have received when it comes to this specific sort of incidents. So once again, breath every 5 seconds and evaluate, because sometimes people will come back just from receiving the air. Sometimes people don't necessarily need the injection of naloxone. The air itself can prompt them to start breathing again on their own. Some people will come back from that. If they're not coming back from just receiving the air, that's when we're going to move on to the M, which is a muscular injection. Now this is where we're going to be using the naloxone. And naloxone is wonderful because it is an incredibly safe drug. Its only function is to operate as an opiate antagonist, which means that it binds to the same receptors in the brain that the opiate does. It doesn't have any other function, and therefore there are no adverse side effects. If a person is not experiencing an overdose and they receive naloxone, it's not going to cause any harm to them. You can't overdose on naloxone. It is completely safe. So the naloxone comes in little glass vials that look very much like this. Some of the vials that come in kits will have little plastic ampule breakers on them. Depending on where you get the kits, some do not. In the case where they do have the ampule breakers, and I'll show you an actual naloxone vial here, but in a lot of them they will have a little silver dot on the inside there. It might be a little bit difficult to see, but there's a silver dot. So that's going to be our pressure point when we're breaking that. But for now, we're just going to be using the water because we're not going to be using the actual naloxone for a demonstration here. The naloxone vials, you'll see, have a lot of liquid that gets trapped in the cap. So I'll get you to follow along with me, and what we're going to do is we are gently going to remove that liquid by giving it a little swirl from the wrist. We want to avoid anything that is going to be jerky, sudden movements, because that can cause the glass to come out of our hands and break on the ground. You should have it there. Let's take a look. There, perfect. So usually it only takes a couple little swirls, but I've gotten to the habit every time you pick up one of the glass ampules, give it a little swirl, make sure you get it down. The ampule contains 1 milliliter of naloxone or 0.4 milligrams of the drug, so it's not a lot. We want to make sure that we have as much into that needle and then into the person as possible. The needles, I'll show you. These things are known as vantage point syringes, which means that when the plunger is fully depressed, the needle will actually pop back inside of the syringe to make the needle safe for disposal. You don't have to worry about finding a sharps container right away. But in keeping that in mind, it's important to note that when you open it, you want to open it from the flaps. A lot of people have gotten into the habit of busting it through the paper to open. That, in some cases, has caused the plunger to go down and the needle to retract. So we want to make sure that we're not doing that. We're opening it right by the package. So back to the glass ampule here. We've got all of the liquid down. If you have a plastic ampule breaker, once again, you want to aim for the little dot. If you don't have an ampule breaker associated with your kit, and you can get them elsewhere if you're interested, but I find that holding the glass as close as possible to the seam is going to reduce the chances of it breaking at an awkward angle, potentially cutting you or breaking the glass. If you hold it too far up or down, it can cause the glass to break. So I find opening it close to the seam, and when we open, we're going to pull our wrist towards ourselves so that the glass will break facing the opposite direction. It's not going to come and hit us in the eye. So we're just going to give it a quick pop. Fantastic. All right. With our needles, we will take the cap off of the needle. Okay, and we'll put it right down to the very bottom of the glass. Okay. Now, once again, there's 1 milliliter of solution in this glass vial. So we're going to, and note there's oftentimes a little bit of air in that syringe, that's okay. We're going to give it a nice pull for about 1 milliliter. There's a little measurement on the bottom, and we'll just hold it there and allow the liquid a chance to actually make its way through the needle. It takes a little bit of time before it will actually all come through the needle, so we don't want to just keep pulling or we're just going to get a syringe full of air. So once again, we just give it a nice pull and wait, and just hold the plunger up. We don't continue to pull, we just wait and let the liquid make its way down through.
How much are we looking for, 1 millimeter?
Well, we want to get all the solution up. So there might be a little bit of airspace in the syringe before we start pulling, but we want to get all of the liquid into the syringe. It can be difficult for a lot of people, which is why I find it's really helpful for people to have an opportunity to practice before an event is actually occurring. So we're going to aim for a large muscle on a person. The best muscle to go for is going to be on the thigh. If we look at a person's upper thigh and we kind of divide it into 3 portions, we're going to go in for the middle portion there. Okay. The injection can be given right through clothing. You don't have to worry about removing clothing. If a person is wearing jeans or whatever, it can go directly through. If you don't have good access to the thigh muscle for whatever reason, you can also do the upper arm. If you're doing so, it'll be about 3 fingers below the shoulder. Or if you're doing the butt, it's going to be the upper outer portion of the butt. Okay. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to practice on this fellow here who isn't breathing. And I do want to stress once again, this has been a little bit of a trial to get through this process here. We want to make sure that the person is still receiving breaths every 5 seconds. Okay. Throughout all that we've just done, through the breaking, through the drawing, all of that, every 5 seconds they should be getting air. So we'll pick a location on our patient here and just put the needle straight in. And then we're going to push it all the way to the bottom until we hear the click. And see, the needle has now retracted into the syringe. Okay, yeah, I see. It hasn't gone into our patient. It's right back in here. It's safe. We're going to dispose of this with a sharps container when we're not in an emergency situation. It's not incredibly important right now. This is safe.
Okay, looking for the upper third.
Okay, and he's definitely not model to the typical human being. So for all intents and purposes here, yeah, you're gonna look for about the middle section of the thigh, but just wherever you find a good spot, you can stick it right on in.
And then we're gonna press down.
And then press right down to the very, very bottom. And you can make it click.
Is that it?
Okay, I don't think that was the click you're looking for, but you don't have to put the needle back into the person to get the click either.
There we go.
All right, wonderful. So safe. Now, the next step is once again evaluate. The naloxone on average takes about 2 to 3 minutes before it takes effect. So we want to make sure that we're continuing to provide breathing for the person and check them out and see, are they starting to breathe on their own? Are they starting to gain any sort of color back in their face? What's going on? How are we doing here? If at the 2 to 3 minute mark they have not started responding, breathing on their own, we're going to give them another injection. Hopefully the ambulance will be on the way. There will be naloxone with the paramedics, and so if additional doses are going to be needed, then we can do so. But we're going to space them out about 2 to 3 minutes. It does take a little bit of time for the naloxone to actually take effect and to start working. So we'll just keep the breathing going, keep the naloxone administration going, and once again, hope 911 will be coming shortly.
Great.
When a person does come out of an overdose, they don't recall having overdosed. So it is important to explain to a person, look, you experienced an overdose, we've given you naloxone. It's incredibly important that they don't use again for at least a couple of hours. The naloxone isn't a permanent fix. It temporarily blocks the opioid receptors in the brain and kicks the opiates out of there, but they are still present in the system, and when the naloxone starts to wear off, they can go flooding back towards those receptors and the overdose can return. So whereas a person might be experiencing some dope sickness, some symptoms of withdrawal after having come out of an overdose, using again is not going to take away their withdrawal symptoms. All it's going to do is cause more of the opiate to gather in their system, and when the naloxone wears off, it can make the overdose come back even worse. So we do caution people to avoid use for a couple of hours after having received naloxone.